Hi, I am here with Deb She's an adoption social worker with Olmsted County. Elizabeth Meyer and myself are doing our presentation on older children being adopted. So we're here to talk with Deb about some of the practices and good things that are happening in Olmsted County with kids. So hi Deb.
Hello.
We are talking about older children being adopted, and one of the things we're wondering is, do you see any struggles with older kids and waiting to be adopted versus younger children, like say a baby or an infant?
Yes, well, let me begin by telling you that more often than not, when people approach our agency wanting to adopt, they're typically more interested in the younger children, so maybe like 0 to 5. Sometimes some are interested in school age. And usually there's just but a few that seem to be interested in kids that are 12 and above, and particularly the older teenagers, let's say. So number one, what I would tell you is that the people that are coming through the door, again, prefer to adopt the younger children versus the older children. So what that means then is that we're forced sometimes to do, make basically, or conduct specialized recruitment efforts. A lot of times what we do is we'll sit down with the youth to talk about kind of who's in their, who's in their circle of support, and sometimes check to see if any of those people in their circle of support might have an interest in adoption. And again, that's all providing that maybe the worker that was prior to us in servicing the case wasn't able to locate a permanency option. But anyway, so sometimes we'll do work with the youth, trying to kind of determine, again, who's in that circle of support. Sometimes we might even contract with private adoption agencies. There's one in particular that I have contracted with several times now called Ampersand Families, and they're located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And their specialty is looking for families for older kids. They have actually been able to help me with the 2 youths I did refer. They did find 2 families. The one is still in the process of being adopted. The other one, due to some kind of licensing issues, they weren't able to adopt this girl, but they became her mentor. So sometimes one of the barriers with adoption for older kids is just we sometimes lack the resources, meaning families who desire to adopt those older kids. Another thing that oftentimes comes into play with older kids is that, being that they are older, they have established relationships with their birth parents, siblings, cousins, whatnot. And so it becomes very important when you're looking for a family to find a family that is willing to have an open adoption. Because again, part of what we want to do is help families understand that it's important to honor those relationships, that they're important for the children. Even though maybe that person doesn't have the capacity to parent the child, there's still that need to maintain that relationship. Another barrier sometimes that comes about is that sometimes our kids don't want to be adopted. Sometimes what that means is that they maybe don't understand what that is. Sometimes they're not feeling emotionally ready for that. Sometimes maybe they're still grieving the loss of their birth family system. Even though there's a part of them that might understand why they're not there, it's still emotionally difficult to kind of wrap their minds around that. So we'll try to do some work with kids there. It used to be in the state of Minnesota that older kids could determine that they didn't want to be adopted. That's now since been repealed, and that if they are a state ward, the county agency that's responsible for that youth, even if, again, they don't want to be adopted, we still have to make adoption efforts. I can think of an older youth right now I'm working with who's actually 17 and a half, and he's vacillated in his willingness to be adoption. Actually, his pre-adoptive home unfortunately disrupted, but since then he's really vacillated in his desire to become adopted. Now he's decided he does, but he is very specific as far as wanting to stay in the community that he's in at this point. Chances are we'll probably not find a family there for him, so we'll look and perhaps try to locate a family, again in a different part of Minnesota that maybe he could connect with. Whether they adopt or not, maybe they could be like a mentor family. It's hard to say. What else do I want to say? Just along with that, again, kids can't say if they, again, we have to recruit no matter what kids say, but I will tell you that when they turn age 14 in the state of Minnesota, they actually have to sign an affidavit stating they want to be adopted by the adopted family or the adopting family. What else would I say are barriers?
And is that a new law that kids over 14 need to sign for? That's something that's always been in place?
I don't know exactly when that went into place, but since I've been in this position for about the last 10 or 11 years, that's been the case.
Okay.
What is new legislation, or at least a new procedure, is that kids can no longer say that they don't want their county worker to recruit. I mean, they can say I don't want to be adopted, but we still have to make recruitment efforts.
Okay.
So,
okay.
And of course, the belief I think behind that is that we all need connections. And the last thing that we would ever want to do for a kid making them a state ward is to disconnect them from all their relationships. And so, I mean, just because you turn 18 doesn't mean that you stop needing emotional support. Or what if you're a youth that chooses to go away to college and your dorm closes down during the holidays? Well, you need somewhere to go. I mean, we all still need some place to belong, essentially. I'm sure there's more I could probably talk about. But
exactly.
Why don't I give you that?
Okay, I think that sounds great. I know there's different barriers to older kids, and they come with some different needs versus, an infant, which may have a little bit less challenging kind of hurdles to get through. So it sounds like older kids might add a special kind of challenge and twist to things too.
And you're right, and thank you for giving me that reminder, because that is sometimes also probably another big barrier, is that you're right, most of our older kids do have some kind of a special need, whether it be a documented disability or some kind of a diagnosis. And sometimes with one diagnosis goes along another. And so sometimes they can become really complicated. They're great kids, but they can become really complicated kids as far as trying to figure out if our families have the capacity, not just willingness, but capacity to meet their needs, and not just in the moment, but over the course of time. And unfortunately in our system, what we see sometimes, because we're in the area of high-risk adoption, is a lot of our kids in the system come prenatally exposed, or there's certainly a risk that they were prenatally exposed. And sometimes our kids, after suffering poor early beginnings, and sometimes a loss of many relationships over time, they sometimes don't always trust adults. And so sometimes our kids have some kind of an attachment issue. Sometimes it rises to the level of having a clinical diagnosis of reactive attachment disorder. And when you combine reactive attachment disorder and fetal alcohol, you're parenting one of the most challenging children there is. And that is even separate from just all the issues of being an adoptee.
Good points. Good points. Can you talk a little bit about Olmsted County's position on long-term foster care versus adoption?
Yes, I can. And I'll speak to that with regard to our state wards. So in other words, where the parental rights have been terminated. Our position in Olmsted County since I've been here is that we believe strongly that there's a family for every child out there. It's just that we need to find that family. And again, sometimes we have to be creative in our recruitment efforts. So again, our position is that we need to continue to look to find an adoptive family. If we can't find an adoptive family, then the other part of it is trying to really pay attention to what are those support persons for that child. So that if they're not adopted, they still have people to go to, like we talked about earlier. People that they can, depend on emotionally, maybe even sometimes financially. But generally speaking, if you look at the research and you look at the literature, typically, why our county doesn't believe in long-term foster care, especially for state wards, is that the outcomes are very poor. And oftentimes those kids, there's a higher risk that they won't graduate from high school. They'll become involved in needing some kind of public financial assistance, move into, poverty, those kind of things. And so it's really not a good resilience measure or practice if we don't really kind of try to get our kids linked. And because that's part of what we know was missed for them, is that along the way in their lives, they wouldn't be state boards if there was a lot of things that got missed for them, and that's through relationships. And so if we can create some new relationships for them, and perhaps honor those other ones I've talked about, again, just trying to kind of just expand their circle of support. Hopefully that is what will give them some of the things they didn't get, so they can, overcome some of their adversity.
Great. I know that you spoke about Olmsted County. Are you familiar with any other counties in Minnesota's policies regarding long-term foster care versus adoption, or across the board, do other counties operate generally that way?
I really couldn't speak to that other than to say that I think most folks in the world of adoption feel that long-term foster care is not true it's not true permanency. And again, it's not to say that sometimes for some kids maybe that's what happens. It's just I don't think it's really considered best practice. And I think the state of Minnesota, and I'm just saying, I think they would concur with that. And that's why there's things in our state. There's many things our state does to help counties find permanent homes for kids. For example, in our state, it's state law that once a child becomes awarded a state where their parental rights are terminated, we have 45 days as a county social worker to register them on the state adoption exchange. There are times where we can exempt or defer them, like if they're in like residential treatment, or maybe there's a foster family that's going to be adopting, but maybe there's just some things that haven't happened yet. So like I said, that's one avenue, and that's open to the public. So, for example, Missy, you could go to what is it, it's changed a little bit, marn.org, and you could look and see what children are available. And again, what you're going to find is that it's going to be older children. There's a overrepresentation of kids that come from sibling groups and kids of color. And so that's one avenue that our state uses to, again, aid county workers in recruiting families for kids. The other thing they do is there is some funds called the private PPAI, the Private Public Adoption Initiative. And that's where counties can link with other private adoption agencies and have contracts with them where maybe they do like child-specific recruitment. And so, because sometimes some counties have such a caseload where that's difficult to really do that well, so they can contract